Firstly, just to begin, Rabbi Menachem, I just heard you mention, you know, you were just singing a song before with the four malachim, which I think we've all heard that those four malachim's names spell the word Gemara. Spell the word Gemara. Right now, a year ago, we started a endeavor, an undertaking, a shear, a matzah. Oh, perfect timing. About to talk about Kinyan. A year ago tonight, we got together in Rav Menachem's house. And we spoke about a small shir, a few minutes of Torah. We try to make it not so difficult. And there were moments that people thought it was too difficult and not too difficult. But Lamaisa, as sometimes you have to do in life, there was a moment of, we'll call it faith and trust and belief. And the Elam Dovin, we started a shir a year ago. And Baruch Hashem, sometimes only a year later could you reflect back and could you see what the shir has become. Sometimes you look back after a year and you say, oh, pops up on your phone. And 1 year ago today, you're like, oh, another endeavor I started. And hey, when's the last time I went to that shir? When's the last time I opened that sefer? Oh, another one. Okay, I will try again. And it happens. You always have to keep on trying. But sometimes a year later, you look back and you say, wow, it was a year. The shir is still growing. The shir is still going stronger and stronger, stronger than ever, Baruch Hashem. And it all has to do with the seeds that were planted. When you plant the seeds, when you have strong roots, then something could grow incredibly. Sometimes you could have lots and lots of flowers and lots of growth, but if there's no roots holding it in, it looks all nice. And it looks all gishmak, and for a few moments sometimes it's amazing. And there's a shear, and there's a minyan, and there's wow. And then what happens? And then what happens is you look back and you're like, hey, remember that shear? Remember that minyan? Remember that matziv? And sometimes you wonder what's the difference? Why sometimes do things last and sometimes not? And there's one critical answer, and it's really a lifelong avoid. And the answer is, did you have the appropriate foundation before you start? Was there a yisoid? Was there a basis? Or was it something that was another good idea, another endeavor, which is also nice? It's always good to try. But if you don't have the appropriate foundation, and part of building a foundation requires hard work. To build a foundation, you got to dig deep, you got to lay the cement. And digging deep and laying cement requires toil, sweat, requires difficulty, sometimes struggles, sometimes questions, sometimes did we do it right? We could have done it better. Maybe we should do this. Let's change it up. So when that's being done to put the appropriate foundation in, then you could have an incredible growth. And Rabbi Yehuda, you mentioned before so beautifully, we were talking about how the sap comes up, and he said something so nice. When we look at the trees, there's something else that's critical for growth. And this is something a little bit more difficult, but because you said it, I could now elaborate upon it. Sometimes you'll have a tree, and it'll come this spring and it'll start growing. But the those who know trees will look at the tree and say, it's going to fall soon. So what do you mean? It looks great. Look at there, it's growth and it's this. He says, no, no, no. See right there? There's a branch that's dead. And that dead branch is going to pull down the whole tree. That dead branch is going to suck all the life out. It's going to crack and the whole tree is gone. So those who are smart will listen and they'll say, okay, how do I take care of the branch? And they'll go and they'll trim off the dead branch and then the tree will thrive. Or others will say, nah, what's the problem? There's a dead branch there and there's an issue there. Just leave it all, leave it all. And then it will fester and then it will kill your tree. So another thing that the sap, the nourishment does, another thing that we're celebrating on Tu B'Shvat is that if it's dealt with appropriately, you're able to cut off the issues. And that's the hardest part of life. Sometimes the growth, the doing the positives, the asay toiv is easy. It's very hard. Mesilas Yesharim says the hardest thing is to get off the couch. He says man is created heavy. Man, by its very nature, just wants to be. Piece of Mesilas Yesharim I learned today is he says that what do we all want to do? We just want to sit and relax. A good cup of wine, a big fat steak, probably a screen larger than the whole room, a big recliner, and I'll see you next week. That's what we want to do. But says Mesilas Yesharim, that's how God created us. Our very DNA wants that. So realize when we want to sit and when we don't want to get up and we don't want to get off the couch and we don't want to go to minyan and we don't want to learn and we don't want to do the chesed and we don't want to, that's natural. That's normal. That's exactly how Hashem programmed each and every one of us. But then comes the realization, okay, what happens if I'm going to spend my whole life on the couch? We're going to come look like who knows what. And after many years, we're going to look back and we're going to be depressed like half the world. And we're going to have the big screen and we're going to have all the drinks and I'll have all the meat. And we'll look back and we'll be one big failure, a dismal disaster. Or we'll get up and we'll do something. We'll do something positive. So it's true. The Asay Tov is hard as well. But what's most difficult is trimming off those dead branches. What's most difficult is the Sur Meiraz looking ourselves in the mirror and saying, 1 second, I'm not 12 anymore. I'm not 18 anymore. Maybe I'm not 25 anymore. Maybe I'm not 30 anymore. And at every stage in life, we have to be able to look in the mirror and say, 1 second, I'm this beautiful tree. I'm growing. I'm becoming something amazing. I look back after a year and wow, the shir is growing and the shul is growing and my ruchnis is growing and I'm feeling more connected and I'm davening and I'm learning and I'm doing chasadim and I'm being a good husband, I'm being a good father and I'm doing all the right things. But 1 second, when I look in the mirror, I see that there's something growing out of my left ear. And that thing, if I don't cut it off, you know what it's going to do? That's a growth. That's a dead branch. And that's going to sap out all the life. So another avodah, as we look at Tu B'Shvat and we look at the fruits, and we start to think about what is the fruit and what is the depth of the fruit. And we're celebrating the fact that now a little bit of growth comes in. We have to realize there's another step that we need to take. And sometimes we have to do that really difficult thing and cut off something. Obviously, not too big, not too drastic. That's the worst thing ever. Yeah, just start, take those, like a child, you get the power tool. Yeah, I'll take care of the tree, no big deal. And you start cutting, I'll take care of one branch and another dead branch. Before you know it, you cut down the whole thing. So we have to be careful also. Even within the Sur Meirah, we have to take things slowly and we have to do things healthfully and we have to do things appropriately. But we have to realize that part of the incredible avodah is to be able to say no, is to be able to look deep and say, I'm not that person anymore. And that, in my humble opinion, from what I've seen in my own life, is often the hardest thing to do, is to realize that we are not the children that we maybe want to be, that we're not the person anymore that wants to do that, to be there, to act that way. And we have to sometimes say, no, I'm still there. I'm still a child. I still could do that. I still could do that. But eventually we have to be able to look in the mirror and we have to say, you know what? I'm not anymore. We have to say, you know what? I got to take off the training wheels. You have to say, you know what? I got to get rid of the bicycle and I got to start to drive. We have to say, you know what? Maybe it's time to get in the airplane and fly. But we have to realize that there comes a point in life for the Sur Meirah as well. So as the sap goes in, as we tap into and we find that little bit of growth within each and every one of us, and as we realize that we're celebrating that eventually that growth is going to come to a chanata, to a blossoming, that there's going to be fruits, there's going to be peiros. But guess what? If we don't get rid of the dead branch, if we don't take rid of something in our life, unfortunately, there might be fruit for a moment. The tree might blossom and it might look amazing, but it's going to die and fail, like many of the endeavors, like many of the fads, like many of the things that we see in the world that look so nice and look so beautiful in a picture, but unfortunately they don't stand the test of time. The only thing that stands the test of time is when you have the appropriate sides, the appropriate roots of that tree. So b'siyata d'shmaya, as we look back and we say, look, we created a shir, we created a learning of Gemara, we created a connection to the Gemara, we created a love to be able to actually understand a piece of Gemara. And for those who haven't yet, you maybe look around and say, hey, if that guy is able to do it, maybe I'm also. And if that guy was able to leave behind, then maybe I'm also. And I'll conclude with a thought that we shared Shabbos Chanukah. Only saying this again because not everyone was there. It's a deep thought. We're not going to say the whole thing. It's one short idea. Yosef HaTzadik was in the heat of the moment. Ishes Potiphar is trying to grab him. And what does it say? It says she grabbed hold of his begadim. And what happens? His clothing, and he runs outside. And the obvious question is, Yosef, I know you had to run away. I know it was at the peak of temptation. I know you were worried to fail, but grab your clothing. Yosef, you're running outside undressed. I understand that you don't want to do an Aveira, but grab the clothing and put on the shirt as you're running outside. What are you doing? So the thought that we shared is that no, when you want to get out of the temptation, when you want to overcome something, you have to be willing to leave behind your begadim. What are your begadim? Your externalities. What are your externalities? Are all those layers that we've spent our whole life building up this person that we think we want to be. There comes a point in our life that we have to be willing to shed it all. Allow it to leave, to go deeper, to go inward, to realize the neshama within us, that beautiful piece of godliness that came from under Hashem's throne that He put in me and He put in you, something that we could connect to, something that at moments of real tefillah we feel, at moments of real learning we touch, at moments of beautiful simcha we realize, wait, I'm something deeper. There comes that point of life we have to be willing to leave the begadim, leave the clothing, leave all our past behind, run outside and connect to what's real. So hopefully, b'siyata d'shmaya, on this Tu B'Shvat, as we're celebrating, as we're realizing that there's going to be a growth, we'll connect not only to the fact that we're growing, we'll realize the fact that we're becoming great, but we'll do that by also taking something in our life. Maybe it's one extra part of davening I'm not going to talk about. Maybe it's one extra part of davening I'm going to try to say. Maybe it's one extra minute I'm going to come earlier. It's one less time I'm going to get upset at my wife. It's one extra bit of patience I'm going to have with my children. It's one extra bit of greatness I'm going to have in my life. As we realize the sap within us is coming out, as we start to realize, hey, I'm not that child anymore. I am actually a big person. My neshama is big. I am big. As we realize that, we'll take rid of something. We'll cut off one little twig, but that one little twig will fuel so much growth, allowing those roots to dig deeper and deeper into the ground, and ultimately allowing that when that fruit comes out, it will be beautiful, lush, amazing, and it will fuel more and more an everlasting growth as we connect to Hashem in the most deep and profound ways. Shkoyach.